Victoria Harrington snatched the suitcase from Emily's hands and hurled it down the marble staircase herself, clothes scattering across the floor like trash. "Pick it up," she said, "and get out of my house." Ryan didn't move. Vanessa Blake stood beside him, sliding Emily's pearl earrings onto her own ears one by one, smiling. Then Ryan grabbed Emily's arm, dragged her to the front door, and shoved her out into the freezing rain with both hands. The door slammed, the locks turned, and from inside laughter. They had no idea. The woman soaking in their driveway owned more than they could ever steal. If you've never seen someone destroyed and reborn in the same story, stay right here, subscribe to our channel. Follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The night Emily Carter's life collapsed was a Thursday in late November. Not the dramatic kind of collapse that people write novels about, not earthquakes or explosions or flashing lights. It was the quiet, suffocating kind. The kind that happens in expensive houses behind closed doors, where the carpets are thick enough to swallow your footsteps and the walls are tall enough to swallow your screams. Emily had been married to Ryan Harrington for 6 years. 6 years of waking up before 5 in the morning to press his shirts because the housekeeper didn't do it right. 6 years of hosting dinner parties she wasn't invited to sit at. 6 years of learning which wines his mother preferred, which subjects his father considered beneath discussion, and which version of herself she needed to disappear into just to survive another week inside those walls. She had told herself it was love. Looking back, she understood it was survival instinct dressed up in bridal white. That Thursday, Emily had spent the afternoon reorganizing the East Wing Library because Victoria had decided without warning that the book collection needed to be sorted by color instead of by author. She'd worked for 4 hours straight. Her back ached. She hadn't eaten since morning. When she finally came downstairs carrying a small stack of misplaced volumes, she heard laughter. Female laughter, coming from the sitting room. She didn't think much of it at first. Victoria had guests frequently. Politicians' wives, charity board members, women who wore their jewelry like armor and smiled like weapons. But when Emily pushed open the sitting room door, it wasn't Victoria's friends inside. It was Vanessa Blake. Sitting on the cream settee that Emily had chosen at auction wearing a silk blouse Emily had never seen before, with her legs crossed like she owned the room. And beside her, Ryan. Close, too close. His hand resting on the cushion behind her shoulder, his face relaxed in a way Emily hadn't seen in years. The three of them froze. Then Ryan slowly sat forward. "Emily," he said. His voice was flat. "The way you say a word you've grown tired of." Vanessa didn't flinch. She reached for her champagne glass. Emily's champagne glass from Emily's grandmother's set took a slow, deliberate sip and looked at Emily the way a cat looks at something it's already decided isn't worth chasing. "So," Vanessa said, "this is the wife." Emily's throat tightened. She set the books down on the side table because suddenly she couldn't remember why she was holding them. "Ryan," Emily said quietly, "can I talk to you privately?" "There's nothing private here anymore," he said. Those 5 words landed like a fist in her sternum. Victoria appeared in the doorway behind Emily then, and Emily realized with a horrible sinking certainty that she had walked into something that had already been decided. Something that had been arranged, rehearsed, settled. She was the last to arrive at a meeting that had started without her. "Emily," Victoria's voice was controlled, surgical. "Come sit down." "I'd rather stand." Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't like that. Victoria never liked when Emily had a spine. It confused her. "Suit yourself," Victoria said. She moved to the armchair by the fireplace and sat like a judge settling in for sentencing. "Ryan and I have been discussing the situation. We think it's time to be honest with everyone." "The situation," Emily repeated. "Your marriage," Victoria said with a patience that was more insulting than cruelty, "has not been working for some time. Anyone with eyes can see it. Ryan deserves to be with someone who complements his life, his career, his social standing." Emily looked at Ryan. He was staring at the floor. "And I don't," Emily said. It wasn't a question. Ryan finally looked up. "It's not about worth," he said. Then he paused, and something in his face shifted, something she recognized as rehearsed, and he said, "Actually, yes. Yes, Emily, it is. It is about worth. You don't bring anything to this family. You never did. You came here with nothing, and 6 years later, nothing has changed. The room went quiet except for the rain hitting the windows. Vanessa uncrossed her legs and crossed them again. She was watching Emily the way people watch reality television, waiting for the crying part. Emily did not cry. She said, "I brought myself." Ryan laughed, short, dismissive. "Emily, I worked in that library for 4 hours today," she said. "I've spent 6 years keeping this house running while you traveled and entertained and did whatever it is you've been doing with her." She glanced at Vanessa. "I never asked for gratitude. I never demanded recognition. I was loyal. I was present. I was your wife." "You were the help," Vanessa said pleasantly. "Let's not dress it up in sentiment." Emily turned to look at her fully for the first time. Vanessa Blake was beautiful, the way a blade is beautiful, precise, polished, and designed to cut. Dark hair pinned back, eyes sharp, wearing a smile that came easy because it cost her nothing. "You don't know me," Emily said quietly. "I know everything about you," Vanessa replied. "Ryan talks, and honestly, darling, you sound exhausting." "Enough," Ryan said, though it wasn't clear who he was talking to. He stood up, reached into his jacket, and placed a folded document on the coffee table. Emily stared at it. She knew what it was before she touched it. She had known, she realized, for months, the way he stopped coming home for dinner, the way he slept at the far edge of the bed, the way he looked at her sometimes with an expression she'd never been able to name until this moment. It was contempt. Quiet, practiced contempt. "Divorce papers," he said. "My attorneys drafted them. Your settlement is fair. The terms are straightforward." Emily picked up the documents. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. She flipped through the pages. 4 years of marriage acknowledged. No children. A lump sum payment that was, she noted, exactly what Ryan spent on 1/4 of his wardrobe. "This is what 6 years is worth to you," she said. "You signed a prenuptial agreement," Victoria said. "The terms were established before the marriage." "I was 24, Emily said. "I was in love. I would have signed anything." "That," said Victoria, "is precisely the problem." Ryan walked to the window. His back was to her. "I'm not a bad person, Emily. I need more than this, than what we have." "What we have," Emily said, "is a marriage you abandoned 3 years ago and never had the decency to end honestly." He said nothing. She set the papers back on the table. "I need time to review these with a lawyer." "Of course," Victoria said smoothly. "Take whatever time you need, within reason." She paused. "The estate staff will prepare your belongings this evening. We've arranged a room for you at the Whitmore Motor Inn on Route 9 through Saturday. After that, your time at this address ends." Emily stared at her mother-in-law. "You've already had my things packed." "We didn't want the transition to be uncomfortable for anyone." Uncomfortable. The word hit Emily somewhere between her ribs. They'd packed her things. Before telling her, before the conversation, before the papers were even shown to her. They had already decided the timeline, the accommodation, the narrative, and this entire evening had been nothing more than the courtesy of informing her. She had not been consulted. She had been notified. "Where is my grandmother's china?" Emily asked suddenly. "The set in the sitting room, the champagne glasses." Vanessa raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "I do love those glasses." "They belong to my grandmother," Emily said. "They're in the Harrington household," Victoria said. "They stay." Emily looked at the glass still in Vanessa's hand, her grandmother's glass, filled with someone else's champagne. She took a breath. "I'll be ready in an hour," she said. She turned and walked out of the room before anyone could respond. Upstairs, in the bedroom that had been hers for 6 years, Emily found 3 suitcases neatly arranged near the door. Packed by staff she had known by name, by preference, by the way they each took their coffee. Hector, who always called her Mrs. Emily. Lorraine, who left lavender sachets in her linen drawer every second Monday. Her clothes were folded, neatly, carefully. The photo frames were not included. She opened the closet. The dresses she'd worn to Ryan's events, to galas, to his mother's birthday luncheons, to charity functions she had organized, and he had taken credit for all still hanging untouched. But the simple things were gone. her books from the nightstand, her grandmother's jewelry box, a small framed photograph of her parents taken years before they died. She opened the largest suitcase, found the photograph at the bottom under a neatly folded sweater. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the photograph, looking at her parents' faces. She didn't cry then either. She thought, I am 30 years old. I have no job, no family, and less than $3,000 in a personal savings account that Ryan didn't know existed because she had saved it the way women in dangerous situations learn to save slowly, secretly, $20 at a time in case the day came when she needed to run. The day had come. She thought, this is the worst night of my life. She was wrong, but not in the way she feared. 40 minutes later, Emily wheeled her suitcases toward the front entry herself. She didn't call for help. She didn't want anyone from that household to touch her things again. Ryan was in the hallway. He'd been waiting, she realized. Emily. Don't, she said. She kept walking. I'm sorry. I know this isn't how you deserve to find out. She stopped, turned slowly. You know what the worst part is, she said. Not the affair, not the papers, not even tonight. She paused. The worst part is that I spent 6 years being grateful just to be here. I said thank you to your mother for every criticism she gave me. I apologized to you for things that weren't my fault. I made myself smaller and quieter and less because I thought love meant fitting into whatever shape someone needed you to be. She looked at him. I'm done being sorry for existing. Ryan opened his mouth. She turned back to the door. Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked down at Emily, the way a woman looks at something she has successfully disposed of. Good luck, Emily, she said. Formal. Final. From the sitting room doorway, Vanessa leaned against the frame, still holding the champagne glass. Safe travels, sweetheart. Emily walked out into the rain. The wind hit her immediately sharp cold, the kind that cuts through wool and settles into the bones. The suitcase wheel caught on a crack in the stone path, and the handle snapped. She stopped, looked at it, and kept walking anyway, dragging it by the broken handle through the long, curved driveway, past the iron gates, out onto the dark road. The gates closed behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. She stood on the side of the road for a moment. The rain was coming down hard. The nearest bus stop was a mile away. The Whitmore Motor Inn was 11 miles south. She was cold and soaked, and her arm ached from the broken suitcase, and she had $212 in her coat pocket, and the most important question she could think to ask was whether to cry now or walk first. She chose to walk. She had been walking for 7 minutes when she saw the lights. Not the headlights of a passing car, not the amber glow of a street lamp. These lights were different. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom moving slowly along the road beside her. Not passing, keeping pace. Emily kept walking. The car slowed to a stop. The rear window descended. Inside, in the soft amber interior light, sat a man she had never seen before, older perhaps 60, with white hair, an immaculate charcoal suit, and the kind of face that had spent decades being listened to. He held a single document folder on his knee. Mrs. Harrington, he said. Emily stopped. I don't know you. No, he said, but I've been looking for you for nearly 3 years. He paused. My name is Gerald Ashworth. I am the senior partner at Ashworth and Crane Attorneys at Law, specializing in estate litigation and corporate succession. He held up the folder. I need you to come with me, Mrs. Harrington. Tonight. What I have to tell you cannot wait. Emily stood in the rain looking at him. Why should I trust you? She asked. Gerald Ashworth reached into the folder and produced a single photograph. He held it toward the window. Emily leaned in slightly. The photograph was old, black and white. A young woman standing in front of a large building, laughing, head tilted back. She was beautiful. She was wearing a simple dress. She looked exactly like Emily. Who is that? Emily asked. That, said Gerald Ashworth quietly, is your grandmother, Margaret Sterling, taken in 1971 outside the headquarters of Sterling Global. He met Emily's eyes. Which as of 72 hours ago you own in its entirety. The rain kept falling. Emily stared at him. I don't understand, she whispered. You will, he said. Please come inside. Emily looked back once at the iron gates of the Harrington estate still visible in the distance, at the warm light in the windows, at the life that had just ended. Then she looked at the man in the car, at the photograph of her grandmother, at the folder on his knee. She picked up her broken suitcase. She got in. Gerald Ashworth signaled the driver. The Rolls-Royce pulled away from the road, quietly sliding through the rain with the ease of something that had never known resistance. "How much do you know about your mother's family?" Gerald asked, opening the folder across his knee. "Not much," Emily said. "My mother died when I was 9. My father 2 years later. I grew up in foster care." "Yes, we know." He paused. "Emily, may I call you Emily?" She nodded. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to absorb. It will challenge everything you've been told about your past. I need you to hear me completely before you respond." She looked at him steadily. "Go ahead. Your mother's name before marriage was Catherine Sterling. Her mother, your grandmother, was Margaret Sterling, born Margaret Cole. Margaret was the only daughter of Edmund Sterling, who founded Sterling Global Industries in 1958. Edmund Sterling built one of the largest private industrial empires in American history: shipping, infrastructure, energy. At its peak, Sterling Global operated across 43 countries and employed over 200,000 people. Emily listened without moving. Edmund Sterling died in 1987 when your mother was 19 years old. His estate, the entirety of Sterling Global, passed to a trust established in his will. The trust had one instruction: the inheritance would be held in protection until his direct bloodline heir could be located, verified, and presented before the estate board. Gerald paused. "Your mother was located, but before the transfer could be completed, she disappeared, changed her name, moved. She was running from something, Emily or someone. We were never able to reach her again. When we later learned she had died, we began looking for her children." Emily's throat was very dry. "That's me," she said. "You are the last living direct descendant of Edmund Sterling," Gerald said. "You are the sole heir. The trust has been accumulating interest, dividends, and equity for over 3 decades. As of this month, Sterling Global's total valuation, including trust holdings, subsidiary companies, and liquid assets, is—" He paused and turned a document toward her. Emily looked at the number. She read it twice. Then she said very quietly, "That can't be right." "It is entirely correct," Gerald said. "Emily Carter, you are, as of 72 hours ago, the wealthiest woman in the United States." Outside the window, the Connecticut roads blurred by in the rain, trees and street lamps and the occasional lit window of someone's ordinary life. Emily sat very still. She thought about Ryan's voice saying dead weight. She thought about Victoria pressing folded bills into her hand like charity. She thought about Vanessa laughing with her grandmother's glass. She thought about 7 minutes walking alone in the cold with a broken suitcase. And then Emily Carter did something nobody in that Rolls-Royce expected. She started to laugh. Not hysterically, not bitterly, not the fragile, desperate laughter of someone unraveling. She laughed the way you laugh when you've been holding your breath for 6 years and someone finally tells you it's safe to exhale. Gerald Ashworth watched her. Something shifted in his careful expression, something that might on another face have been described as relief. "There's one more thing," he said gently when her laughter had quieted. Emily wiped her eyes. "Of course there is. The estate board requires your presence in Zurich within 72 hours to begin formal succession proceedings. After that, you will have access to all accounts, all holdings, and complete executive authority over Sterling Global." He paused. "I want you to understand what that means. When you walk into that boardroom, Emily, you will have the legal and financial power to reach into the life of every person who touched yours and hold them accountable. Every fraud, every theft, every debt." He looked at her carefully. "Including the Harrington family," he said. Emily turned to look out the rain-streaked window. She thought about the iron gates closing behind her. She thought about the word the people who destroyed her would wake up and use tomorrow, words like settled and handled and finished. She thought about Ryan's face when he said, "You don't bring anything to this family." She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Gerald." Yes. Tell me everything about Sterling Global. From the beginning. All of it. And Gerald Ashworth, who had spent 30 years practicing the controlled language of law, opened his folder, settled into his seat, and began to talk. The Rolls-Royce moved south through the storm. Behind it, in the lit windows of the Harrington estate, 3 people toasted to the future. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. They had no idea who they had just made. And they had absolutely no idea, not even the smallest, most cautious fraction of suspicion, that the woman they had thrown into the rain was the only person on earth with the resources, the legal authority, and now the absolute absence of anything left to lose, to take everything they had ever called their own. The storm was just beginning, and Emily Carter was no longer walking through it. She was driving. The plane landed in Zurich at 6:43 in the morning. Emily had not slept. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ryan's hands on her shoulders shoving. She heard the locks turning. She heard Vanessa's laughter bouncing off marble floors like something celebratory, like a toast, like a reward. So she stayed awake, and she read. Gerald had given her 4 folders before they boarded: financial summaries, corporate structures, trust documentation, a 40-page brief on Sterling Global's current operational status. She read all of it twice. By the time the Swiss Alps appeared outside the window, pale and enormous in the early light, Emily Carter understood 3 things with complete clarity. First, she was on paper extraordinarily wealthy. Second, the wealth meant nothing without knowledge of how to control it. Third, the people who had humiliated her were already counting on her to disappear quietly. She had no intention of disappearing. The estate outside Zurich was not what she expected. She had braced herself for something cold and corporate, a glass-building conference rooms, men in suits waiting to explain her own inheritance to her in language designed to make her feel small. Instead, Gerald drove her to a private property in the hills above the city. Stone walls, old trees, the kind of place that had been owned by the same family for so long it had stopped looking like property and started looking like landscape. "This belonged to your grandfather," Gerald said as the car stopped. "Edmund Sterling purchased it in 1963. He worked here every summer until he died. It's been maintained by the estate trust since then." He paused. "It's yours now." Emily stood outside the car and looked at the building for a long moment. "He never knew about me," she said. "No," Gerald admitted. "By the time we traced the lineage to your mother, and then to you, Edmund was gone. But he anticipated this. The trust documents are extraordinarily specific. He wrote them as if he knew someone would have to search for a long time." He looked at her carefully. "He wrote a letter, for whoever was found, for the heir." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope aged and sealed. "I was instructed to give it to you after you arrived, not before." Emily took the envelope. She didn't open it immediately. She held it against her chest for a moment, standing in the cold morning air, feeling the weight of a dead man's words against her sternum. Then she went inside. The letter was 2 pages handwritten, dated 1986, 1 year before Edmund Sterling died. His handwriting was precise and slightly formal, the penmanship of a man who had learned to write when writing was considered a reflection of character. He wrote, "I do not know who you are. I do not know your name, your face, or what life has handed you before this moment. But you are mine, bone and blood, and that means something. It means you are capable of more than you currently believe. Sterling blood does not break. It bends, absorbs, and then it rises. Whatever they have taken from you, and someone always takes from people like us before we know what we are worth, understand that the taking was temporary. What you are about to become is permanent. Do not be gentle with the world until the world has earned your gentleness. But do not become cruel. Cruelty is the weapon of people who have nothing else. You have everything else. Use it." Emily read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her coat against her heart. She didn't cry. She made a decision. Within 48 hours of arriving in Zurich, Emily had signed the succession documents past 2 separate identity verification processes and been formally recognized before the Sterling Global Estate Board as the sole living heir and new executive authority of the Sterling Empire. The board members, 12 of them, sat across a long table and looked at her with varying degrees of surprise assessment. And from two of the older members who had known Edmund personally, something that looked almost like relief. The board chairman, a Swiss attorney named Dieter Braun, leaned forward after the signing. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I want to be direct with you. Sterling Global has been in a holding pattern for 11 years. The trust has protected it, but it has not grown it. It needs leadership. Active, present, decisive leadership." He paused. "Do you have any corporate experience?" Emily looked at him calmly. "No," she said. "But I have 6 years of experience managing a household for people who treated me like staff organizing events that generated millions in charitable donations and surviving inside a family structure designed to make me believe I was worthless." She paused. "I learned fast, and I am highly motivated." Dieter Braun looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Good." That was the beginning. What followed was not a movie montage. It was not elegant or cinematic. It was brutal, concentrated, exhausting work of the kind that strips away everything soft and leaves only what's essential. Gerald assembled a team, not assistants architects, people who had spent their careers building power structures, managing hostile corporate environments, navigating the intersection of law and money and influence where most people got swallowed whole. There was Isabel Marchetti, a Milanese financial strategist who had restructured 4 collapsed European conglomerates and had a reputation for being able to read a balance sheet the way other people read faces. She arrived at the Zurich estate on the 3rd day, sat across from Emily at the dining room table, and opened a laptop without introducing herself. "You have 18 subsidiaries generating negative returns," Isabel said without preamble. 3 of them are actively being looted by their regional managers. I need to know in the next 60 seconds whether you want to fix them or cut them." Emily said, "Fix them, but make the managers feel what they did before they're removed." Isabel looked up from the laptop. For the first time since arriving, she smiled. "Good answer," she said. There was Marcus Webb, a former federal prosecutor turned private legal strategist, compact and precise, who specialized in corporate fraud investigation and what he called structural accountability, which Emily came to understand meant the legal art of dismantling a corrupt empire from the inside out, using its own paperwork as the weapon. Marcus arrived on day 5. He sat down, opened a file, and said, "Tell me about the Harrington family." Emily told him. She told him everything. Ryan's logistics company, Victoria's position on the boards of 3 Connecticut-based charities she used as social currency, the offshore accounts Ryan thought she didn't know about because she'd overheard a phone call 2 years into the marriage and filed the information away the way she filed everything that felt dangerous. The suspicious invoices she'd seen on his desk when she brought him coffee on Sunday mornings that she'd photographed on her phone out of instinct she couldn't have explained at the time. Marcus listened without writing anything down. When she finished, he said, "You have a photographic memory." "Not exactly," Emily said. "I have the memory of someone who spent years paying attention because nobody else was." Marcus nodded slowly. Harrington Logistics has 3 outstanding federal compliance reviews that stalled because someone with political connections made phone calls. They're not closed. They're sleeping. He paused. "I can wake them up." "Do it," Emily said. And there was Dr. Cora Sims, a behavioral psychologist and communications expert who had spent 20 years training executives, public figures, and as she put it directly, people who needed to learn how to walk into a room and own it without apology. Cora arrived on day 7. She looked at Emily for a full minute without speaking. Then she said, "You hold your breath when you enter a room. You've been doing it for years. It's a survival habit you shrink before anyone can tell you to. We're going to fix that." "How?" Emily asked. "By making you understand in your body, not just your brain, that you are the most important person in any room you walk into. Not because of the money," she paused, "because of what you survived to get here." For the next 3 months, Emily worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. Mornings with Isabel, finance, corporate structure, acquisition strategy, the language of money spoken at altitude. Emily learned to read a balance sheet with the same fluency she'd once used to read Ryan's moods. She learned the difference between liquidity and leverage, between hostile acquisition and strategic partnership, between a company that was struggling and a company that was being deliberately strangled from within. Afternoons with Marcus Law Compliance Federal Investigation Procedures, the architecture of corporate fraud and how it was dismantled. She learned how debts were transferred, how shell companies were used to hide assets, how the paper trail of financial corruption, if you knew where to look, was almost always there, because greedy people were also almost always arrogant, and arrogance made them sloppy. Evenings with Cora presence, language stillness, the way you enter a room, the way you pause before speaking, the way silence wielded correctly is more powerful than any sentence. Cora made her practice walking into rooms full of people and commanding the attention without saying a word. She made Emily listen to recordings of great negotiators and identify the precise moment always before the other person realized it, when the power in a conversation shifted. At night, Emily read everything she could find about Sterling Global, about its competitors, about the Harrington family business history, about the Connecticut political landscape where Ryan operated. She stopped introducing herself as Emily Carter. She started introducing herself as Evelyn Sterling. The first time she said it out loud in a room full of board members and attorneys who had known the Sterling name for decades, she felt something happen in her chest. Not grief, not pride exactly, something older and more fundamental. Recognition. As if the name had been waiting inside her the whole time and had only now been given permission to surface. "Ms. Sterling," Dieter Braun said when she walked in late to a board session and every head turned, "we were just discussing the Harrington situation." She sat down, straightened her jacket. "Tell me where we are," she said. "Marcus has confirmed the federal compliance reviews can be reactivated through a formal complaint filed by any party with documented evidence of financial misconduct." Dieter paused. "The question is timing." "Not yet," Evelyn said. "We don't move on Harrington until we own his debt." Isabel looked up. "We've identified the 3 primary banks holding Harrington Logistics' outstanding loans. Combined exposure is approximately $47 million. "Buy them," Evelyn said. The room went quiet. "The banks?" Dieter asked carefully. "The debt," Evelyn said. "Acquire it through a subsidiary, something with no visible connection to Sterling." She looked at Isabel. "Can we do it without Harrington knowing who's holding his paper?" Isabel was already typing. "Give me 10 days. It took 8. Through a series of subsidiary acquisitions routed through 3 different holding companies in Delaware, the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg, Sterling Global's financial arm quietly purchased every significant debt position held against Harrington Logistics. $47 million of Ryan's future, transferred into the invisible hands of his ex-wife. Ryan didn't know. He couldn't know, because the name on the paperwork wasn't Evelyn Sterling. It wasn't even a name. It was a number, a registration, a company that existed only on paper, tracing back through layers of legal structure that would take a skilled investigator months to unpeel. Ryan was at that moment celebrating. Evelyn knew this because Marcus had a contact inside the Connecticut business community who attended the same golf club as Ryan's CFO. The contact reported that Ryan had just closed a deal with a new investor, a Vanessa Blake, who had liquidated a substantial personal portfolio to buy into Harrington Logistics as a silent partner. She was now financially tied to the company she'd helped destroy a marriage to access. When Marcus told Evelyn this, she sat very still. "Vanessa invested her own money into his company," she said. "Approximately $2.3 million, Marcus confirmed." Evelyn thought about this, about Vanessa's money now locked inside a company whose debt was quietly owned by the woman she'd mocked while wearing stolen earrings. "Don't touch it yet," Evelyn said. "Let it sit. It'll lose value over time as the company continues to slide." "I know," Evelyn said. "Let it sit." Because this was the thing Evelyn had learned, the most important thing, the thing that separated strategy from reaction timing, was everything. Moving too fast was the mistake every wounded person made. You strike when the emotion is sharpest and the planning is thinnest, and you give your enemy time to recover. You give them a story, the scorned woman, the bitter ex-wife, the person who couldn't move on. She had no interest in being anyone's story. She intended to be their ending. The invitation to the Harrington Annual Gala, Arrived at the Zurich estate forwarded through a contact in Connecticut 6 weeks before the event. Black card, silver script. The Harrington family's signature event, 150 guests, politicians, investors, old Connecticut money Wall Street figures who did business with Ryan's logistics network. Evelyn held the invitation and felt nothing for a moment. Then she felt everything. That house, that ballroom. The same marble floors where she'd stood holding someone else's books while Ryan sat too close to another woman. The same staircase Victoria had looked down from like a judge. The same rooms where Evelyn had apologized, accommodated, diminished, and endured for 6 years. "We're going," she told Gerald that evening. He looked at her carefully, as the representative of Sterling Capital, she said, "Ryan is going to be desperate for investors by then." Isabel's projections. Harrington Logistics will be in serious liquidity trouble within 60 days, Isabel confirmed from across the room. The new contracts they're counting on won't close. I've spoken to 2 of the potential partners privately. They're reconsidering. "Good," Evelyn said. "Make sure the timeline holds. I want Ryan scared before the gala. Scared enough to take a meeting with anyone offering a lifeline." She paused. "But not so scared he cancels the event." Marcus was already making notes. "We'll need a name, a corporate identity for the approach, something credible." "Sterling Capital," Evelyn said. "Registered in New York, founded 18 months ago, clean history, legitimate portfolio." She looked at Marcus. "Can you build it?" "It's already half built," he said. "I started 3 weeks ago." Evelyn looked at him. "I knew you'd want to go back," he said simply. "I just waited for you to decide when." She spent the weeks before the gala working on one thing above everything else. Not the legal strategy, not the financial architecture, not even the dress, though Cora had opinions about that strong ones, and they spent an afternoon in Milan that Evelyn would later remember as the moment the last piece of Emily Carter was finally retired. She worked on stillness, the ability to walk into that house, that specific house, and feel nothing that showed. To look at Ryan's face and not flinch. To hear Victoria's voice and not shrink. To see Vanessa Blake in a room she'd once shared and feel nothing except the clean, quiet certainty of someone who already knew how the evening ended. Cora drilled it into her daily. "What do you feel right now?" "Anger," Evelyn said on one of the early sessions. "Show me what that looks like on your face." Evelyn let it surface. She knew what it looked like. She'd seen it in mirrors for years. "Now put it away," Cora said. She did. "Now show me nothing." Evelyn looked at her. "That," Cora said quietly, "is power, not the anger, the choice, the decision to hold it and not release it until the exact moment it does the most damage." She paused. "That's what your grandfather had. You can see it in every photograph. He never showed anyone what he was thinking until he'd already won." "He lost at the end," Evelyn said. "They still took from him." "He lost one battle," Cora said. "You're finishing the war." The night before the gala, Evelyn stood alone in the Zurich estate and called Gerald into the study. "Tell me the worst-case scenario," she said. Gerald sat down. He was quiet for a moment. "Ryan recognizes you before you execute. He panics, makes a scene. The plan loses its precision. And if he does, then you improvise," Gerald said. "But Emily Evelyn—" He stopped, chose his next words carefully. "I've worked with powerful people my entire career, people who were born into power, people who built it, people who took it." He looked at her. "I have never in 40 years of practice seen anyone absorb what you absorbed in the last 3 months and emerge the way you have." He paused. "Whatever happens tomorrow night, you have already won. Because you are no longer the woman they threw out into the rain. That woman is gone." Evelyn thought about that. She thought about Emily standing in the driveway with a broken suitcase and $200 and the rain coming down. She thought about the locked gates. She thought about Ryan's voice saying dead weight. "She's not gone," Evelyn said quietly. "She's the reason I'm doing this." She looked at Gerald. "She's the reason I won't stop." Gerald nodded slowly. "Then God help the Harringtons," he said. The car arrived at 7 the following evening. A black Rolls-Royce, identical to the one that had found her on the road in the rain. Evelyn stepped out of the estate wearing a dress the color of blood floor-length structure designed by a woman in Milan who had listened to Evelyn's story without comment and then taken measurements with the focused intensity of someone building a weapon. Gerald held the car door. He looked at her for a moment before she got in. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Evelyn Sterling got in the car. It pulled away from the estate and moved through the night toward the airport, toward Connecticut, toward a house with iron gates and warm windows where 3 people had toasted their own success 6 months ago and had no idea the reckoning had been traveling toward them ever since. In the inside pocket of her coat, folded against her heart, Edmund Sterling's letter said, "What you are about to become is permanent." She believed him now. The Rolls-Royce pulled through the gates of the Harrington estate at exactly 9:17 in the evening. Evelyn had timed it deliberately. Not the first to arrive that would signal eagerness. Not fashionably late that would signal insecurity disguised as confidence. 9:17 was the exact moment when a party had found its rhythm, when the drinks had loosened the room, when people had stopped watching the door and started watching each other. The moment when a new arrival could walk in and own the entire room before anyone understood what had happened. Gerald sat beside her in the back seat. He had said almost nothing for the past hour. "You ready?" he asked. Evelyn looked at the lit windows of the house. The same warm glow she'd watched from the rain 6 months ago. The same iron gates now open wide, now welcoming, now dressed with arrangements of white flowers that probably cost more than 2 months at the Whitmore Motor Inn. "I've been ready for 6 months," she said. The driver opened the door. Evelyn stepped out. She had worn the red dress with intention. Not red like a warning, red like a declaration. The kind of color that didn't ask permission to be seen. Her hair was different, not dramatically, but precisely. Her posture was different. Everything Cora had spent 3 months rebuilding was present in the way she moved across the stone entrance, unhurried, unashamed, taking up exactly the space she was owed. The door was opened by a member of the household staff. Young. She didn't recognize him. He looked at Evelyn, then at Gerald, then back at Evelyn and said, "Good evening. May I have your name for the guest list?" "Evelyn Sterling," she said. "Sterling Capital. We're expected." He checked his tablet, found the name Marcus had ensured it was there, added through a mutual connection of Ryan's CFO 3 weeks prior. "Of course, Ms. Sterling. Welcome." She walked through the door, into the house where she had spent 6 years being invisible. The ballroom was full, 130 people, perhaps more, arranged across the space in the particular social geometry of wealth clusters of power, orbits of ambition, a few isolated figures who had come for the food and the contacts and would leave with neither. A string quartet played in the far corner. Servers moved through the crowd with champagne. Evelyn scanned the room in 3 seconds. Ryan near the bar in a tuxedo laughing at something his CFO had said. He looked thinner than she remembered. Tired around the eyes in the way people look when they're managing a fear they haven't admitted to themselves yet. Victoria holding court near the fireplace with 3 women Evelyn recognized from charity circuit events. Victoria wore her signature deep blue. She was performing composure with the practiced ease of a woman who had been performing composure her entire life. Vanessa beside Ryan in a champagne-colored gown that was expensive and slightly wrong, the choice of someone who had money, but not yet the instinct for when to be subtle. She had her hand on Ryan's arm in the territorial way of someone who needed the room to know she had won. None of them had looked up yet. Evelyn accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, took 1 measured sip, and waited. It took 45 seconds. She counted. It was a senator's wife who saw her first. The woman's eyes landed on Evelyn and stayed the way eyes do when they've encountered something they can't immediately categorize. She leaned toward her companion and said something. Her companion looked. Then a third person noticed. The particular social electricity of a room responding to a presence it couldn't place spread outward from where Evelyn stood like a current. Ryan felt it before he saw it. She watched him register the shift in the room, a slight change in his CFO's attention, a turn of the head, the way the conversation beside him thinned out. He looked up, following the direction of everyone else's gaze, and he saw her. He didn't recognize her. She watched the process happen in real time across his face. He saw a woman in a red dress who commanded the room. He registered her as someone important, someone he should know, someone whose name he was probably supposed to remember. His expression arranged itself into the smooth social readiness of a man who had spent his life networking. He did not see Emily. That was the first victory of the evening. And Evelyn felt it land cleanly in her chest, not as triumph yet, but as confirmation. Everything she had worked for in the past 6 months had led to this precise moment, standing in this house, unrecognized, powerful, and completely in control. Vanessa saw her next. Evelyn watched Vanessa's eyes travel across the roomland and sharpen. Vanessa was predatory in her social awareness. She had always been good at identifying threats. Evelyn could see the calculation happening. Beautiful woman, unknown, commanding attention. Vanessa's hand tightened slightly on Ryan's arm. Victoria was last. When the older woman's eyes found Evelyn, something happened that Evelyn hadn't entirely anticipated. Victoria didn't look curious. She didn't look socially threatened. She looked for just a fraction of a second before her composure reassembled itself unsettled. Not in the way of someone encountering a stranger, in the way of someone encountering something they had hoped they would never have to face. Evelyn filed that away. Gerald touched her elbow lightly. "Ryan's CFO is moving toward us," he said quietly. "Right on schedule." Derek Paulson, Harrington Logistics' chief financial officer, reached them with his hand already extended and his smile already calibrated to the appropriate level of enthusiasm for greeting a potential major investor. "Ms. Sterling, Derek Paulson, CFO at Harrington Logistics, we're so glad you could make it tonight." "Thank you for the invitation," Evelyn said. Her voice was unhurried. She shook his hand with exactly enough firmness. "Sterling Capital has been looking at the Northeast logistics sector for some time. I understand Harrington is one of the more established players." "Absolutely," Derek said with the slightly too eager energy of a man whose company desperately needed this conversation to go well. "Ryan has built something really remarkable over the past decade. We'd love the opportunity to walk you through our current portfolio and growth trajectory." "I'd like that," Evelyn said pleasantly, "but not tonight. Tonight is social. Let's agree to a formal meeting early next week, and tonight I'll simply enjoy the party." She paused and looked past Derek with precisely calibrated interest. "Is that Ryan Harrington I'd like to be introduced?" Derek turned relief and excitement competing on his face. "Of course, let me bring you over." The walk across the ballroom took perhaps 30 seconds. Evelyn measured every step. She was aware of the room watching. She was aware of Vanessa watching, most of all that sharp, evaluating gaze, tracking her from across the space like something that hadn't decided yet whether she was competition or simply entertainment. Ryan turned as Derek approached. His social smile was already in place. "Ryan," Derek said, "I'd like you to meet Evelyn Sterling. She's the founder and principal of Sterling Capital out of New York. Ms. Sterling Ryan Harrington." Ryan extended his hand. "Ms. Sterling, it's a genuine pleasure. I've been looking forward to this introduction." Evelyn took his hand, shook it, looked directly into the face of the man who had shoved her out of this house into the rain 6 months ago, and said with a calm and warmth that required every single thing Cora Sims had ever taught her, "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Harrington. You have a beautiful home." She watched him process the compliment, watched him find nothing in her face except the polished pleasantness of a business encounter, watched him relax. "Thank you," he said. "It's been in the family for some time. Can I get you another drink?" "I'm fine, thank you." She tilted her head slightly. "I've been hearing your name in some interesting conversations lately. The logistics infrastructure work you're doing in the Mid-Atlantic region, that's exactly the kind of asset deployment Sterling Capital looks for." Ryan's eyes sharpened with interest. Evelyn recognized it. She had seen that expression hundreds of times across a dinner table, the particular focus he gave things when money was involved. "We've got some exciting developments in that corridor," he said. "I'd love to walk you through it in detail. Are you in New York generally, or—" "I travel," she said simply. "But I'll be in the area through the end of the month. My team has been reviewing Harrington's public filings. There's a real opportunity here, I think, if the timing is right for both parties." "The timing," Ryan said carefully, "is very right on our end." He was trying not to sound desperate. He almost succeeded. "Wonderful," Evelyn said. She reached into her clutch and produced a card, clean cream-colored, embossed. Sterling Capital, Evelyn Sterling Principal. She held it out. Ryan took it, looked at it. Sterling, he said. Any relation to Sterling Global, the industrial, distant, Evelyn said with a small, precise smile. Very distant. She moved on before he could ask another question. That was the art of it. Leave them wanting the next conversation. Leave them doing the pursuing. She spent the next 90 minutes working the room with the deliberateness of a surgeon. 12 conversations, 4 senators and their representatives, 3 Wall Street figures whose firms had existing relationships with Harrington Logistics, 2 journalists from financial publications who would within days be receiving carefully sourced information about Harrington's compliance vulnerabilities from a source they would never be able to trace back to Evelyn. She was on her 3rd circuit of the room when Vanessa intercepted her. It was not accidental. Evelyn saw it coming from 20 feet away, the way Vanessa angled through the crowd, cutting off the natural flow of the party with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent years positioning herself in rooms. "Ms. Sterling," Vanessa said, extending her hand. "Vanessa Blake, I don't think we've been introduced." "We haven't," Evelyn said, shaking her hand. Up close, Vanessa was exactly as she remembered, beautiful, sharp, wearing her confidence like a performance. "Are you a friend of the Harringtons?" Something moved behind Vanessa's eyes. "I'm Ryan's partner," she said, the word partner landing with deliberate weight, "in the business and otherwise." "Congratulations," Evelyn said pleasantly. "It's a well-established company, considerable potential if the current challenges are managed correctly." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know about the challenges?" "I wouldn't be here if I didn't," Evelyn said. "Sterling Capital doesn't invest in companies it hasn't fully researched." She paused. "I understand you have a personal stake in the business as well. That's a significant commitment." Vanessa stiffened. She hadn't expected Evelyn to know that. Evelyn watched her recalibrate. "I believe in what Ryan is building," she said carefully. "Of course," Evelyn said. "I hope that confidence is well placed." She smiled, not warmly, but not coldly either. Something precise and unreadable. "It was lovely to meet you, Ms. Blake." She moved on. Behind her, she could feel Vanessa watching. She could also feel from across the room that Victoria Harrington had been watching the entire exchange. At 10:45, Ryan found her again. He had a drink in his hand and the loosened quality of a man who had been managing anxiety all evening and had finally given in to the alcohol as a management strategy. He was charming in the way he was always charming when he needed something warm, eyes easy smile, leaning in slightly as if sharing something private. "Ms. Sterling," he said, "I hope you're enjoying the evening." "Very much," she said. "I wanted to speak with you directly, if that's all right." He lowered his voice slightly. "Derek may have mentioned we're in a period of strategic growth at Harrington, and we're looking at select capital partnerships to fuel that expansion. I don't want to do business at a party, but I want you to know that we're prepared to move quickly if Sterling Capital is genuinely interested." "How quickly?" Evelyn asked. "A meeting this week, a term sheet within 10 days if there's alignment." She looked at him. "What number are you looking for?" He didn't flinch. $100 million, structured as a preferred equity position with board observation rights. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. The silence lasted just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "That's a serious ask," she said. "It's a serious company," he said. She nodded slowly, as if considering. "Send the full financials to my office Monday morning. I'll have my team review them by Wednesday. If what I see aligns with what I've heard, I'm open to a meeting Thursday." Ryan visibly exhaled. Yes, absolutely. Thank you." She looked at him for one more second. He still didn't see her, not even a flicker. "Thank you for the invitation tonight, Mr. Harrington," she said. "It's been a very productive evening." She turned and walked toward the exit. Gerald fell into step beside her. "He took it," he said quietly. "Completely," she said. "Thursday meeting, term sheet Friday, signing by end of next week if he's as desperate as the numbers suggest." "He is," Evelyn said. "He had 3 drinks in the last hour. He's been watching the door all night. He's not hosting a gala. He's running a rescue operation dressed as a celebration." They were almost at the exit when Victoria appeared. She stepped into their path with the particular deliberateness of a woman who had decided something and committed to it fully. She was alone. Her social performance had dropped away. What was left underneath was harder, older, and more honest. "Ms. Sterling," Victoria said. Gerald stopped. Evelyn stopped. Victoria looked at Evelyn with an expression that was not quite recognition and not quite suspicion. It was something in between the feeling of a word at the tip of the tongue, the haunted quality of almost knowing. "I don't believe we were introduced properly this evening," Victoria said. "I'm Victoria Harrington." "I know who you are," Evelyn said. Victoria's chin lifted slightly. "Have we met before? You look—" She stopped. "I have one of those faces," Evelyn said pleasantly. "People often feel like they know me." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved across Evelyn's face with the careful attention of a woman trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't yet admitted she was working on. "What did you say your background was before Sterling Capital?" "I didn't," Evelyn said. "But since you ask, I came from very little. I spent years learning what I was worth. And then I built accordingly." She paused. "It's a common story, actually. You'd be surprised how many people in rooms like this started with nothing." She smiled. "Good night, Mrs. Harrington." She walked out. Behind her, Victoria Harrington stood very still. The meeting on Thursday was held in a midtown Manhattan conference room that Sterling Capital had retained for the week, clean neutral, carrying no history that could be read. Evelyn arrived 8 minutes early. Ryan arrived 12 minutes late, which told her everything she needed to know about how confident he was feeling versus how confident he was pretending to be. He had brought Derek and one attorney. Evelyn had brought Gerald, Isabel, and Marcus, though Marcus was introduced simply as a legal consultant, no elaboration. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Ryan presented Harrington Logistics' portfolio with the practiced fluency of a man who had given this pitch many times. He was good at it. Evelyn gave him that. He was persuasive, structured, and he knew how to make a struggling company sound like a company poised for breakthrough. If she hadn't known what she knew, if she hadn't spent 6 months reading his balance sheets, tracing his shell accounts, mapping the architecture of his financial mismanagement, she might have believed him. She let him present. She asked smart questions. She expressed calibrated skepticism and calibrated interest in exactly the proportions designed to make him feel like he was winning her over. At the 2-hour mark, Isabel slid a document across the table. "Our proposed term sheet," she said. $100 million structured as Ms. Sterling outlined. Preferred equity board observation, standard redemption clause. Ryan's attorney reached for it. Ryan was already reaching for a pen. "Before we move forward," Evelyn said, "there's one document I need your signature on today. A preliminary agreement. Standard in our process, it simply confirms that both parties have exchanged accurate representations of their financial position and that no material information has been withheld." Ryan looked at his attorney. His attorney scanned the document briefly. It looked standard. It was 2 pages. Clean language, normal structure. He didn't read the clause on page 2, paragraph 4. The clause that stated that by signing, Ryan Harrington personally attested to the accuracy of all financial disclosures made to Sterling Capital and acknowledged that any material misrepresentation would constitute grounds for immediate debt acceleration across all instruments held by Sterling Capital's affiliated entities, a list that included buried in an appendix on a separate document his attorney had not been provided. Every single bank and debt position that Sterling's subsidiaries had quietly acquired over the previous 4 months. Ryan signed. He signed with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was finally getting what he needed. Marcus, seated at the far end of the table, made a single note in his legal pad. He did not look up. Evelyn watched Ryan's pen leave the paper and felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction, not yet. Something more fundamental. The knowledge that it was done. That the trap had closed so cleanly, so completely, with so little drama, that Ryan would not understand what had happened until it was entirely too late to undo it. "Wonderful," she said. "We'll have the full agreement drafted and over to your office by Monday." Ryan smiled the smile of a man who had just solved his biggest problem. "Ms. Sterling, I have to say I had a feeling about this deal from the moment we met at the gala. I think this is the beginning of something really significant." Evelyn looked at him one last time. "I think you're right," she said. "I think this changes everything." They shook hands. He still didn't see her. She was in the car with Gerald before she let herself breathe. Monday morning. Gerald said, "Marcus files the compliance complaint with the federal office. Tuesday, the debt acceleration notices go out through the subsidiary. Wednesday, we apply for the asset freeze through the Connecticut court." "What's the timeline on the freeze being granted?" Evelyn asked. 48 to 72 hours if the judge is expedient. Marcus believes he will be. "And the mansion? The estate is collateral on one of the debt instruments. If the freeze is granted and the acceleration clause triggers, the property goes into receivership within 30 days. Evelyn sat back in the seat. She thought about Victoria pressing $200 into her hand. "Charity, dear." 30 days, she said quietly. "Give or take." She nodded. She didn't allow herself to feel it yet. There was still work to do. The compliance filing, the court documents, the communication strategy Marcus had built so that when this became public, and it would become public, the narrative was accurate, complete, and impossible to spin. But she let herself think just for one moment about a woman standing in the rain with a broken suitcase, and she thought she earned this. Not the money, not the power, the right to finish what they started. Because Ryan Harrington had thrown his wife into a storm believing she had nothing. He had been right about one thing. Emily Carter had nothing. But Evelyn Sterling had everything. And in 72 hours, Ryan was going to understand the difference. The notices went out on a Tuesday. Ryan's phone started ringing at 7 in the morning and did not stop. His CFO called First Voice tight and strange, saying words Ryan didn't fully process because they didn't make sense in the order they were arriving: debt acceleration, subsidiary acquisition, Sterling Capital affiliate full balance, immediately callable. Ryan called Derek back. "What does that mean the debt is callable? We just signed with Sterling last Thursday." "Ryan," Derek's voice was very careful, "the entity that holds our outstanding bank debt, the $47 million, it's a subsidiary of Sterling Capital. They bought our debt months ago. The signing last Thursday triggered the acceleration clause. They're calling everything. Now." The silence on Ryan's end lasted 4 seconds. "That's not possible," Ryan said. "I'm looking at the paperwork," Derek said. "It's possible." Ryan called his attorney. His attorney confirmed it. He called his bank. His bank confirmed it. He called the court to challenge the asset freeze and was informed by a clerk with no particular emotion in his voice that the freeze had been granted that morning. His accounts were locked. His assets were frozen. His company, which he had spent a decade building with money that, as he would learn very shortly, had never entirely been his to spend, was in federal receivership before noon. He called Evelyn Sterling's office. The number was disconnected. He called the address on the card she had given him. A receptionist at a shared office space answered and informed him that Sterling Capital had vacated the space as of that morning. He sat in his office for a long time after that. He sat very still, and something started to form in the back of his mind. Not understanding. Not yet, but the beginning of a feeling. The shape of a question he couldn't quite articulate. Something about a woman in a red dress who knew too much. Something about a voice that had been familiar in a way he couldn't place. Something about the way she'd said, "You have a beautiful home." His phone rang again. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered. A man's voice, calm, measured older. "Mr. Harrington, my name is Gerald Ashworth. I represent Sterling Capital and its principal, Ms. Evelyn Sterling. I'm calling to inform you that federal investigators will be arriving at your offices at 3 o'clock this afternoon in connection with the compliance review that was filed this morning." A pause. "And I'm also calling to inform you that the representative who met with you at your gala and in Thursday's meeting would like to meet with you one final time, in person, this afternoon, at your home." Another pause. "Or rather, at what was your home." Ryan stood up from his desk. "Who is she?" he demanded. "Who is Evelyn Sterling?" Gerald Ashworth said very quietly, "I think you already know, Mr. Harrington. You just haven't let yourself believe it yet." The line went dead. Ryan was in his car, 18 minutes later, driving toward Connecticut at a speed that his better judgment would have warned him against if his better judgment had not completely abandoned him. He pulled through the gates of the estate gates that already had a court order posted on them and found a black Rolls-Royce already parked in the driveway. Beside it, a woman in a dark coat stood with her back to him. She was looking at the house. Ryan got out of his car. He crossed the driveway. His steps slowed as he got closer. Something in the set of her shoulders. Something in the way she stood. Something that pulled at a memory he'd spent 6 months trying not to have. "Ms. Sterling," he said. She turned around, and Ryan Harrington finally saw her. Not the red dress, not the polished, untouchable woman from the gala, not the powerful stranger who had walked into his house and dismantled his life in a matter of weeks. He saw Emily, his wife, the woman he had shoved out this door in the rain. The color left his face so completely and so quickly that he looked for a moment like a man who had stopped being a person and started being a problem that had no solution. "Emily," he whispered. "No," she said, calm, steady, final. "Evelyn Sterling, sole heir to Sterling Global, and the woman who now owns your debt, your company, and the building you're standing in front of." She let that land. She watched it land. She watched 6 months of his certainty, his arrogance, his absolute confidence that he had disposed of a problem and moved on. She watched all of it fall off him like something that had never been properly attached in the first place. "You," he started. "You said I didn't bring anything to this family," she said. "You were wrong." And behind them, at the end of the driveway, 3 police cars pulled through the iron gates. The 3 police cars stopped at the end of the driveway, and the officers got out with the unhurried professionalism of people who had been briefed and knew exactly what they were there to do. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. The paperwork was already signed. The orders were already in place. This was not an arrest in the dramatic sense. Not yet. It was a federal compliance action, a formal notification, a beginning of a process that had been set in motion the moment Ryan had pressed his pen to that page in the Manhattan conference room 4 days ago. Ryan watched them come and didn't move. He was still looking at Evelyn. Or rather, he was still looking at the place where Emily had been and trying to reconcile it with the woman standing in front of him now, and his brain was doing the thing brains do when reality presents something they were not architected to accept. It kept offering alternatives. It kept suggesting that there was an explanation, a misunderstanding, a version of this that made sense without requiring him to absorb the full weight of what he was seeing. There was no such version. "How?" he said. It wasn't a full question. It was the only word that made it out. "Does it matter?" Evelyn said. "Emily, I told you," she said quietly. "That name is retired." One of the federal agents reached them. He was courteous, professional, addressed Ryan by name, explained in clean, simple language that Harrington Logistics was now subject to a federal financial compliance investigation, and that Ryan would be required to make himself available for formal questioning at the field office in Hartford no later than the following morning. He handed Ryan a document. Ryan took it without looking at it. The agent glanced at Evelyn, recognized her, or rather recognized the name on the legal filings which he had spent the morning reviewing. He gave her a brief nod. Professional, respectful. She returned it. Ryan noticed. And something in that exchange, the simple, unremarkable fact that a federal officer had just nodded at his ex-wife with more respect than Ryan had shown her in 6 years of marriage, cracked something open in him that he hadn't expected. "You planned all of this," he said. His voice had changed. The shock was still there, but something else had moved in beside it. Not quite anger, something rawer. "From the beginning. From the moment you got in that car that night. From the moment you put me in a position where I had to," Evelyn said. "You came into my house, you shook my hand, you sat across from me in that conference room, and you—" He stopped, drew a breath. "You let me sign that contract knowing exactly what it would do." "Yes," she said. "That's Emily, that's Evelyn," she said for the 3rd time. And this time there was no softness in it at all. "And what I did in that conference room, Ryan, is exactly what your grandfather did to mine. Except I used a pen, not blackmail. I used a legal contract, not coercion. And the person who signed it had every resource available to read it carefully and chose not to." She looked at him steadily. "Sound familiar?" Ryan's expression shifted. "What does my grandfather have to do with anything?" Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "Come inside," she said. He followed her. Of course he followed her. because whatever else Ryan Harrington was, he was a man who needed to understand the shape of his own destruction, and Evelyn was the only person who could show it to him. The estate had been placed in receivership, but Evelyn had obtained temporary access for this specific purpose. Marcus had handled it with the court. They walked through the front door, the same door he had pushed her through in the rain, and into the house that was, as of 72 hours ago, no longer his. She led him to the study, the one that had been his grandfather's before it was his father's, before it was his. Dark wood, built-in shelves, the particular smell of old money and older secrets. She set a file on the desk. Marcus had assembled it. It had taken him 4 months. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She remained standing. In 1971, she said, "My grandfather Edmund Sterling developed a revolutionary shipping routing system. It was years ahead of anything else in the industry, a computational approach to logistics that would have transformed maritime freight. He'd spent a decade building it. He called it the Sterling method." Ryan said nothing. He was watching her face. He was in the process of patenting it. He needed a manufacturing partner to scale the technology. Someone approached him through a mutual connection, a businessman named George Harrington. She paused. Let the name land. "Your grandfather." Ryan's jaw tightened. George Harrington requested a full technical demonstration. Edmund provided it full documentation, proprietary schematics, the complete methodology. He trusted the process. He believed they were moving toward a legitimate partnership. Evelyn opened the file and slid the first document across the desk. 3 weeks after that demonstration, George Harrington filed a patent under a subsidiary company he had registered the week before Edmund's presentation, filed it as his own invention. Edmund's documentation, his decade of work, appeared in the patent application almost verbatim. John. Ryan looked at the document. It was a copy of the original patent filing. His grandfather's name was on it. Edmund Sterling's methodology was in it word for word in places. "Edmund tried to fight it," Evelyn continued. "But George Harrington had connections. Edmund didn't political relationships, legal resources, a network of influence that Edmund, who had built his company on merit rather than inherited access, couldn't match. The patent was upheld." She paused. Edmund Sterling spent the next 3 years in legal battles that drained most of his operating capital. His company survived barely, but the shipping technology that should have made Sterling Global the dominant force in maritime logistics instead built the foundation of Harrington Logistics. She looked at him directly. "Everything your grandfather became Ryan was built on stolen work. Everything your father inherited. Everything you inherited." Ryan was very still. He stopped, started again. "That's an allegation, a document. That doesn't prove—" "There's more," Evelyn said. She slid the second document across. This one was older, a letter handwritten dated 1973. She watched Ryan's eyes move across it, watched him find the signature at the bottom. George Harrington, his grandfather's handwriting. She knew it because she had seen it on the framed letters displayed in this very study for 6 years. The letter was addressed to a woman named Margaret Cole. Ryan looked up. "Who is Margaret Cole?" "My grandmother," Evelyn said. "Before she married, she worked in this house Ryan, as a maid. In 1971 and 1972, while the theft was happening and the legal battle was beginning, my grandmother worked inside this estate." Ryan looked back at the letter. His expression was becoming something she had never seen on his face before, the particular destabilizing look of a person whose understanding of their own history is being dismantled piece by piece. "Your grandfather found out who she was," Evelyn said. "He found out that Margaret Cole was Edmund Sterling's daughter, and he used that." She pointed to a specific paragraph in the letter. "He threatened her. If she spoke about what she'd seen, the documentation she'd had access to in this house during the partnership discussions, if she told anyone what she knew about how the patent had really happened, he would ensure her father's remaining legal challenges were destroyed. He would use his connections to have Edmund Sterling investigated for fraud, fabricated fraud." She paused. "My grandmother had a young child to protect. My mother was 4 years old. Margaret Cole signed a non-disclosure agreement written by George Harrington's attorneys, left this house, and never spoke of it again. The room was completely silent. Ryan put the letter down. He did it slowly, the way you put something down when your hands aren't entirely sure what they're doing anymore. Victoria knew, Evelyn said. She's known for decades. That's why she worked so hard to make sure I never felt comfortable in this house, because I wasn't just a woman beneath your family's social standing, Ryan. I was the living proof that your family's fortune was built on theft and coercion. She let that sit for a moment. She recognized my grandmother in me the night of the gala. I saw it on her face. She didn't know who I was, but she felt it. She's been feeling it since the first day you brought me home. Ryan stood up. He needed to move. She understood that the body's instinct to escape a truth that the mind can't contain by simply relocating itself. He walked to the window, stood with his back to her. "Why didn't you just—" he started. "Just what?" she said. "Sue you go public. Walk into a court with documents your family's attorneys would have tied up for a decade." She shook her head. "Your grandfather was clever, Ryan. He built legal protections into the original settlement that made direct litigation nearly impossible without the kind of resources my family didn't have. By the time I had the resources, I also had the wisdom to understand that litigation was the slowest and least certain path." She paused. "And honestly, a lawsuit would have given you something to fight. A narrative. A story where you were the defendant and I was the accuser and the outcome was uncertain." She looked at the back of his head. "I didn't want uncertainty. I wanted completion." Ryan turned around. His face had gone through several phases since they walked in here, and had arrived somewhere Evelyn hadn't entirely expected, not the defensive fury she had prepared for. Something quieter. Something that might, in a different man, have been the beginning of genuine reckoning. "How long have you known?" he asked. "About Sterling. About all of it." "Gerald found me the night you threw me out," she said. "He'd been looking for 3 years. The timing was—" She paused, considering the word. "Appropriate?" Ryan laughed, short and hollow. "Appropriate." He looked at the file on the desk, at his grandfather's letter, at his grandfather's name in ink, above a threat made to a young woman protecting her child in a house where she worked as a maid. "My whole life," he said slowly, "I was told the Harrington name meant something, that we built something, that we earned." He stopped. "You earned nothing," Evelyn said, not cruelly, simply, as a statement of fact. "You inherited the proceeds of someone else's theft and called it a legacy." He flinched. "Your grandfather stole from mine. Your family silenced mine. And then you married me, the one person whose existence was the living evidence of all of it, and you treated me like I was the one who didn't belong." She picked up the file. "You had the stolen prize in your house for 6 years, Ryan. You just never bothered to look closely enough to see what it was." She started for the door. "Emily," his voice cracked on it. "Evelyn, wait." She stopped, didn't turn. "My mother," he said. "Where is she?" Evelyn had been waiting for this question. "The estate has been repossessed. She was notified this morning that she has 7 days to vacate the property. I've arranged for temporary accommodation." She paused. "A motel on Route 9. She heard him inhale sharply. Route 9. The same road where Victoria had sent Emily with $200 and the address of the Whitmore Motor Inn. "Is that—" Ryan stopped. "Is that deliberate?" "Everything I do is deliberate," Evelyn said. "But I want to be clear, the accommodation is clean, the bill is paid for 30 days, and she is in no physical danger. I am not your grandmother, Ryan. I don't issue threats. I don't use people's children against them." She finally turned to look at him. "I am not what your family made me. That is the point." She walked out of the study. Gerald was waiting in the hallway. He looked at her face and asked nothing. They were almost at the front door when they heard Ryan's voice behind them following from the study doorway. "What happens now?" he called. "To me? To what happens?" Evelyn stopped at the threshold. The front door was open. She could feel the November air colder than it had been 6 months ago, cleaner somehow. She turned one last time. Ryan stood in the hallway of his family's house, a house that was no longer his, looking like something fundamental had been removed from him. Not money, not the company, something older. The story he had told himself about who he was and where he came from and what he deserved. "The federal investigation moves forward independently," she said. "I don't control that. I only provided the evidence and the legal opening. What the investigators find is what it is. She paused. As for you personally, you are not charged with your grandfather's crimes. You didn't steal from mine. You inherited the theft without knowing the full truth of it. She looked at him steadily. But you did know, Ryan, that you treated me as disposable. You knew that your mother despised me for reasons she never explained to you because she was protecting a secret. You knew that your marriage was failing, and you responded by humiliating me instead of being honest. She paused. Those are your crimes. Small ones by legal standards, large ones by human ones. Ryan said nothing. The question of what happens to you, Evelyn said, is the same question that was in front of me the night I stood on this driveway in the rain. It's the same question that was in front of my grandmother when she signed that document in fear. She held his gaze. What are you going to do with the life you have left now that you understand what it was built on? She left him with that. Outside in the car, Gerald said nothing for a long time. Then he said, Victoria is at the motel. She's been there since this morning. She's been calling Ryan's cell phone every 20 minutes. I know, Evelyn said. Do you want to speak with her? Evelyn thought about it. She thought about Victoria at the top of the stairs with that final, formal, good luck, Emily. She thought about the way Victoria had pressed money into her hand, like absolution, like charity, like the closing of an account. Not yet, she said. Let her sit with it. She may never admit what she knew, Gerald said carefully. She doesn't have to admit it, Evelyn said. I know. The documents know. That's sufficient. She looked out the window. The estate fell away behind the car. The iron gate still posted with the court order passed on either side. She thought about her grandmother working in that house. Young afraid, protecting a child, signing away her silence, because a powerful man had left her no other option. She thought about her mother growing up in the shadow of that silence, running from something she'd inherited without being told its name, changing her name, disappearing, dying without knowing that the injustice done to her family had never been resolved. She thought about a 4-year-old girl who would grow up to be Catherine Sterling, who would become Catherine Carter, who would die without knowing her daughter would one day walk back into the house where her mother had been silenced and take it apart from the foundation. Gerald, she said. Yes. The employees. Harrington Logistics has about 600 employees in the Northeast Corridor. What's their status? Technically in limbo while the company is in receivership, Gerald said. The federal process could take months. There's a real risk of mass layoffs if no buyer or restructuring plan emerges. I want to buy the operating assets, Evelyn said. Not as Harrington Logistics. Restructure it under a Sterling subsidiary. Keep as many of the workforce positions as the financial support. The people who worked there didn't steal from anyone. Gerald looked at her. That's a significant commitment. I know what it is to lose your livelihood because of someone else's failure, she said simply. I'm not doing that to 600 families. He made a note. And the fraud charges, she continued. The federal investigation, whatever they find, I want it fully transparent. No settlement deals that bury the details. The public record should be complete. That may expose the family history, Gerald said carefully. The Sterling-Harrington patent dispute. Your grandmother's involvement. All of it. Good, Evelyn said. My grandmother deserves to have the truth told. She signed a non-disclosure agreement under coercion in 1972. That agreement has no legal force. And even if it did, she's been gone for 15 years. She can't be hurt by the truth anymore. She paused. But her story can help someone who's alive. She had been thinking about this for weeks, about the specific weight of a secret forced on someone who had no power to refuse it, about what it cost a woman not just legally, not just financially, but in the marrow of her daily life to carry a truth she wasn't permitted to speak. Her grandmother had spent decades with that weight. Her mother had grown up feeling the shape of it without knowing its name. And Emily had walked into a house built on that silence and spent 6 years being made to feel she didn't belong, never understanding that she was the most legitimate person in it. I want to establish something, she said, a fund, for women who are being coerced into silence. Legal coercion, ND, as used to protect abusers, silence agreements used by powerful people against vulnerable ones. I want the best attorneys in the country working to challenge those agreements and give those women their voices back." She paused. "Name it after my grandmother, the Margaret Cole Sterling Foundation." Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Edmund would have approved of you." Evelyn didn't respond to that. She turned back to the window. 2 miles from the estate, her phone rang. She looked at the screen, a number she didn't recognize, Connecticut area code. She answered. "Is this Evelyn Sterling?" A woman's voice, older, controlled, but barely. "It is," Evelyn said. A long pause. "This is Victoria Harrington." Evelyn said nothing. She let the silence sit. "I know you have no reason to speak with me," Victoria said. Her voice was doing something Evelyn had never heard it do in 6 years. It was working hard, straining against something. "But I need you to understand something. I need you to hear me." "I'm listening," Evelyn said. Another pause. Longer. When Victoria spoke again, the controlled quality had slipped, and what was underneath it was something Evelyn had not prepared for. "I didn't know everything," Victoria said. "About your grandmother, about what he did, George, my father-in-law. I knew there was something wrong. I knew the company's foundation wasn't clean, but I didn't know the specifics. I didn't know about the woman." Her voice wavered and recovered. "When Ryan brought you home and I looked at your face, I felt it. Something about you. I couldn't name it then. I called it class. I called it compatibility. I told myself you weren't right for him because it was easier than admitting I was afraid of you." Evelyn sat very still in the back of the car. "Afraid of me," she said. "Why?" "Because you looked like her," Victoria said. "I'd seen a photograph once of a young woman who had been connected to a dispute my father-in-law had resolved before he died. A woman named Margaret. I didn't know who she was or what she meant. But when I saw you, something in me knew. The way you stood, the way you looked at things." A pause. "I was cruel to you. I want to say it plainly because I have spent very few moments in my life being plain. I was cruel to you not because of anything you did, but because looking at you made me feel in a way I couldn't explain that we owed someone something we had never paid." The car was quiet except for the road under the wheels. Evelyn took a breath. "You owe my grandmother something you can never pay," she said. "She's gone. The years she spent silent are gone. What you feel now, that debt, it doesn't go away because you acknowledge it." She paused. "But I'll tell you what I told Ryan. The question is what you do with the life you have left." Victoria said nothing. "The foundation I'm establishing," Evelyn said, "the Margaret Cole Sterling Foundation. It will need a board, visible people, people with social standing in the communities where the work needs to happen." She paused. "If you want to do something real with the rest of your life, Victoria, something that means more than charity galas and social positioning, then, when the foundation is operational, call Gerald Ashworth's office. He'll tell you what's needed." She paused one final time. "But understand what you'd be doing. You'd be putting your name on work that tells the truth about your family. All of it. No softening, no management of the narrative." A very long silence. "I understand," Victoria said. "Then we'll see," Evelyn said. She ended the call. Gerald had been watching her from the passenger seat. He said nothing. "Don't," Evelyn said before he could speak. "I wasn't going to say anything," he said. "You were going to say I was generous," she said. "I was going to say your grandfather would have done exactly the same thing," he said. Evelyn absorbed that. Outside the window, Connecticut moved past. Bare trees, gray sky, the occasional house lit warmly from inside. Ordinary life continuing in all directions. People who had no idea that in a house on the other side of the county, a man was sitting in an empty study, reading his grandfather's handwriting and understanding for the first time what his name had actually cost. She thought about Vanessa. Vanessa, who had invested $2.3 million of her own money into a company that was now in federal receivership. Vanessa, who had worn Emily's grandmother's earrings the night everything fell apart. Vanessa, who had filmed the whole thing on her phone. Marcus had confirmed that morning that Vanessa's investment was unrecoverable under the current receivership structure. The money was gone. Not taken by Evelyn, simply consumed by the failure of a company that had been built on borrowed time and Ryan's talent for performing confidence he didn't have. Evelyn had not orchestrated Vanessa's loss. She hadn't needed to. Vanessa had looked at a man and seen a golden future and put her money on it without reading the room carefully enough. It was, Evelyn reflected, not so different from what Emily had done at 24, except Emily had given years and a marriage and a version of herself she could never entirely recover. Vanessa had given money. Money could at least be rebuilt. She made a decision. "Gerald," she said. "Yes, Vanessa Blake. The $2.3 million she lost in Harrington. I want to know if she has any professional skills that Sterling could use, not as charity, not as mercy, as a genuine assessment." She paused. "If she does offer her a position, entry level, she starts from zero the same as everyone else. If she's capable, she advances. If not, she doesn't." Gerald looked at her. "You want to hire the woman who—" "I want to give the woman who made a bad investment a chance to make a better one," Evelyn said. "What she did to my marriage was her and Ryan's ugliness together, but taking everything from her doesn't make me better than what was done to my grandmother. It just makes me another person in a long line of people who use their power to diminish someone else." She paused. "I'm done with that line." Gerald wrote it down. The car reached the highway, and the speed increased, and the Connecticut landscape opened up wider around them. Evelyn leaned her head back against the seat. She was tired. Not the tired of defeat. She knew that tired had spent 6 years wearing it. This was different. The tired of having carried something heavy for a very long time, and finally in the last several hours having set it down somewhere, it could do some good. There was still work ahead. The federal investigation. The foundation. The restructuring of Harrington's operating business. The legal documentation of her grandmother's story for the public record. 100 decisions that would shape what the Sterling name meant going forward, in contrast to what the Harrington name had been built on. But the core of it was done. The secret that had run through 2 families for over 50 years had been brought into the open. The debt that had been unpaid, not the financial one, but the human one, had been named, not erased, not resolved with the easy finality of a movie, but named, witnessed, entered into the record. Her grandmother had signed a document in fear. Evelyn had signed one in power. That was the distance between a silenced woman and a free one. And in the gap between those 2 signatures, 50 years, 2 generations, a stolen legacy, and a reclaimed one, was the entire story of what one act of coercion could cost a family and what one act of courage could begin to repair. She closed her eyes. In the inside pocket of her coat, Edmund Sterling's letter pressed against her chest. Sterling blood does not break. She believed him completely. The federal investigation into Harrington Logistics took 4 months to complete. Evelyn knew the day the final report was filed because Marcus called her at 6:47 in the morning, which meant he had been awake since at least 4, which meant the news was significant enough that he hadn't wanted to wait until business hours to deliver it. 11 counts, he said without preamble. Wire fraud, tax evasion, falsification of federal compliance documents, and 2 counts of securities fraud connected to the investor materials Ryan used to bring Vanessa Blake in as a partner. A pause. They found the offshore accounts, all 3 of them. Evelyn was standing at the window of the Zurich estate with a cup of coffee she hadn't drunk yet. Ryan knew about the securities fraud. He signed the investor materials personally, Marcus said. His attorney is already in conversation with the prosecutors about a cooperation agreement. Ryan is going to testify about the broader network. There are 4 other companies connected to Harrington's political relationships that are now under separate review. And the patent documentation, Evelyn asked. My grandfather's case. The federal report includes a full historical addendum, Marcus said. The original patent filing from 1971, the comparison with Edmund Sterling's documented methodology, George Harrington's letter to your grandmother. All of it is in the public record as of this morning. He paused. It's already been picked up by 3 financial publications and 1 national newspaper. Evelyn set down her coffee cup. 50 years. Her grandmother's silence had lasted 50 years. And now, in a federal document available to anyone with an internet connection, the truth was simply there. Plain, documented, undeniable. How is it being covered? She asked. Carefully, Marcus said. Nobody wants to get the legal language wrong, but the headline in the Times is fairly direct. He read it to her. Harrington Logistics fraud case exposes decades-old patent theft at company's foundation. She absorbed that. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. "One more thing," he said. "Ryan's guilty plea. His attorneys finalized it this morning. No trial. 18 months minimum security with eligibility for early release at 14. He also agreed to a full financial restitution order, though given the state of his assets, the practical recovery will be limited." "I know," she said. "That was never the point." She ended the call and stood at the window for a long time. She thought about the first time Marcus had sat across from her at the Zurich estate dining table and said, "Tell me about the Harrington family." She thought about how she had talked for 2 hours, and he had listened without writing anything down. She thought about how she had felt in those early days, not powerful, not strategic, not even particularly determined, just honest. Just a woman with a broken suitcase's worth of memories and the slowly growing understanding that the truth, if you could document it completely enough, was its own form of weapon. She had been right. The truth had done what no lawsuit, no confrontation, no moment of public humiliation could have done as cleanly. It had simply arrived. And it had arrived completely in a federal document, in a national newspaper, in a public record that would outlast everyone involved. Her grandmother's name was in print. Margaret Cole Sterling, the woman who had worked as a maid in a house that owed its fortune to her father's stolen work, who had been silenced by a powerful man's threat, and spent her life carrying that silence like a stone. Her name was in print now, not as a footnote, not as a historical curiosity, but as the center of the story. The origin point, the place where the injustice began, and 53 years later where the accounting began as well. Evelyn got dressed. She had a board meeting in 2 hours. The Sterling Global Board had changed considerably in the 4 months since Evelyn had formally assumed executive authority. 3 of the original 12 members had retired voluntarily, gracefully, with the particular relief of people who had been waiting a long time for someone to take the wheel. 3 new members had been appointed, including Isabel Marchetti, who had transitioned from external advisor to full board participation with the focused intensity of someone who had found the work of her life. Gerald remained as senior legal counsel, Dieter Braun remained as chairman, and the relationship between him and Evelyn had evolved from cautious professional respect into something closer to the collaboration of people who had been in a difficult situation together and had come out of it knowing they could trust each other. The board meeting that morning covered 3 items. The first was the formal restructuring of what had been Harrington Logistics operating assets into a Sterling subsidiary. The company had been renamed simply cleanly Northeast Corridor Logistics. 587 of the original 612 employees had been retained. The remaining 25 positions had been eliminated not by layoff, but by attrition and voluntary separation packages that Evelyn had personally reviewed and approved. Not one person had been walked out without full severance, extended health coverage, and a letter of recommendation from the new management. When Isabel had presented the retention numbers in an earlier session, she had said, "This is not the most financially optimal approach." "I know," Evelyn had said. "Do it anyway." Isabel had done it anyway, and 3 months in the restructured company was outperforming its previous metrics by a margin that surprised even Isabel, because as she had noted with the characteristic precision of someone who respected data above sentiment, but was willing to revise her assumptions when the data demanded it, people who feel secure in their employment tend to perform better than people who don't. Noted, Evelyn had said without saying "I told you so." The second item on the board agenda was the formal establishment of the Margaret Cole Sterling Foundation. The legal structure had been finalized. The initial endowment, $50 million from Sterling Global's trust holdings, had been transferred. The foundation's mandate was specific and non-negotiable legal advocacy and financial support for individuals, primarily women, who had been coerced into signing non-disclosure agreements that protected their abusers or shielded financial misconduct from public accountability. The first 3 cases the foundation's legal team had taken on were already in various stages of challenge. One involved a former employee of a financial firm who had been pressured into silence about workplace harassment. One involved a woman in Georgia who had signed away her right to speak about a real estate fraud that had cost her family their savings. One involved a teenager, now 22, who had been made to sign a document at 17 that she hadn't understood, protecting someone who had hurt her. Evelyn had read all the 3 files personally. She had thought about her grandmother signing George Harrington's document. Young, afraid, a child to protect, no resources, no alternative she could see. She had thought this is the work, not the company, not the reclaimed fortune, not even the justice done to the Harrington name. This, the specific, unglamorous case-by-case work of giving silenced people their voices back, this was the thing that mattered. The third agenda item was the mansion. The Harrington estate had been in receivership since the asset freeze. Evelyn had the right of first acquisition as the primary debt holder. The board had been waiting for her decision on what to do with the property. Several members had suggested selling it clean exit significant return on the acquisition cost. Evelyn said, "I'm keeping it." Dieter Braun raised an eyebrow. "For personal use." "For the foundation," she said. "There are 32 rooms in that house, a full commercial kitchen, grounds, a library. It's 10 minutes from 3 major highways and 40 minutes from a major airport." She paused. "I want to convert it into a residential support center. Women leaving abusive situations, not just physical abuse, but financial abuse. Coerced silence, the kind of institutional marginalization that doesn't leave visible marks but destroys people just as completely." And she looked around the table. Women who need time, safety, and resources to figure out who they are outside the situation that diminished them. The room was quiet. Isabel said, "The conversion costs will be substantial." "I know," Evelyn said, "the ongoing operational costs." "I know," Evelyn said again. "Do the numbers. Find the model that makes it sustainable. That's what I pay you for." She looked at Isabel directly. "I'm not asking whether we can afford it. I'm telling you that we're doing it, and I need you to figure out how." Isabel looked at her for a moment. Then she opened her laptop. "Give me a week," she said. After the board meeting, Evelyn went to the estate alone. She had done this twice before, visited the property without staff, without Gerald, without anyone who might interpret the visit as something other than what it was. She had walked through the rooms. She had stood in the library where she'd spent 4 hours reorganizing books the day everything ended. She had stood in the bedroom doorway where she'd found 3 packed suitcases. She had stood at the top of the staircase and looked down at the front entry where Victoria had watched her leave. Each time she came, she felt something different. The first time she had felt the residue of the person she used to be in these rooms, Emily Carter apologizing for existing, making herself small in spaces that she now legally owned. She had felt the ghost of that woman and had acknowledged it without dismissing it. That woman had kept her alive for 6 years in a hostile environment. She deserved acknowledgement, not shame. The second time she had felt the age of the injustice. Standing in the study at the desk where Marcus had spread his documents, she had felt the 50-year weight of what her grandmother had carried in and out of these rooms. She had put her hand on the wood of the desk and thought about a young woman named Margaret, who had cleaned this room not knowing that the man who owned the house had stolen her father's life's work. She had stayed in that feeling until it passed through her and left something cleaner on the other side. This time, the third time, she felt neither of those things. She felt something she recognized after a moment as purpose. The rooms were empty now. The furniture had been removed for appraisal. The personal effects that belonged to the Harrington family had been cataloged and returned. What remained was the structure itself, the bones of the house. And they were good bones. Solid, spacious, built by craftsmen who believed the building would outlast everyone who ever lived in it. It would, just not for the purpose the Harringtons had imagined. She walked through each room slowly, not looking at what was there, but at what could be. She thought about the women who would sleep in these rooms, women who had signed documents they didn't understand, women who had been made to feel they were nothing. Women who had walked out of their own versions of iron gates with broken suitcases and $200 and no clear picture of what came next. She thought about what she would have needed in those first hours. Not sympathy, not charity, a space to stop running, a bed that was safe, time to think, access to someone who could explain her options in language she could actually use, the knowledge that she was not alone in what had happened to her and not stupid for having let it happen and not finished because it had. That was what this house would give. She was standing in what had been the ballroom, the room where she had walked in wearing red and watched Ryan's face cycle through confusion and interest and greed when her phone rang. Ryan. She looked at his name on the screen for a moment. He had called twice before since the guilty plea. She had not answered. Gerald had communicated everything that needed to be communicated through proper channels. She answered this time. Evelyn. His voice was different. She had spoken to many different versions of Ryan's voice over the years, the charming social version, the dismissive domestic version, the frightened financial version from the Thursday meeting. This version was something else, quieter, the voice of a man who had spent 4 months processing a reality he couldn't charm or spend or dismiss his way out of. Ryan, she said. I'm reporting to Danbury in 3 weeks, he said. Federal minimum security facility in Connecticut. I wanted to... He stopped. I don't have a good reason for calling. I just wanted to say something before I go in. Then say it, she said. A pause. She could hear him breathing. I'm sorry, he said. I know it doesn't... Another stop. I know I don't have the right to ask you to accept it. I'm not asking. I just needed you to know that I mean it. Not because of what happened with the company or the investigation. Because of what I did to you. Because of who I let you be treated as. Because of what I knew on some level was happening in that house, and I let it happen because it was easier than being honest. His voice was very controlled, but the control was the effortful kind, not the practiced kind. I threw you out into the rain and I thought I was closing a chapter. I didn't understand what I was actually doing. Evelyn stood in the empty ballroom of what had once been his house. What did you think you were doing? She asked. Getting rid of a problem, he said quietly. I'm ashamed of that. I'll be ashamed of it for the rest of my life. It's a small thing to offer against what we found out, against what my grandfather did to your family. But it's the only thing I have that's actually mine to give. The rest of it, the company, the house, the money, none of it was ever really mine. The shame, though, he paused, that one belongs to me completely. She said nothing for a moment. She thought about what Cora had told her in the early days in Zurich, the choice to hold something and not release it, the power in the decision about when and whether to let go. Ryan, she said, when you come out the other side of this, and you will come out, it's 14 months, not a lifetime. Don't try to be who you were before. That person was built on a foundation that wasn't real. Start from the actual ground. She paused. That's what I did, in the rain, with a broken suitcase. She paused once more. It's harder than inheriting something, but what you build from actual ground is yours. Nobody can take it from you by proving it was stolen. He was quiet for a long time. Take care of yourself, she said. She ended the call. She stood in the empty ballroom for another minute, listening to the silence of a house that had spent decades holding secrets and was about to spend the next decades holding something else entirely. Then she called Gerald. The conversion plans, she said, I want them accelerated. I want the first residents in by spring. That's aggressive, Gerald said. Good, she said. I'm an aggressive person. Isabel will find a way. She usually does, he admitted. Evelyn walked out of the ballroom and through the hallway toward the front entry. One more thing, Vanessa Blake. Has HR completed her assessment? They submitted the report this morning, Gerald said. She has a background in financial marketing and event planning, strong organizational skills. The assessment noted, and I'm quoting directly, an exceptional ability to read a room and manage high net worth relationship dynamics. Evelyn almost smiled. Of course it did. The recommendation was for a position in Sterling's Communications and Investor Relations Division, junior level as you specified. She'd be working under a team of 8, no special treatment. Has she been told about the offer? Not yet. We were waiting for your confirmation. Confirm it, Evelyn said. And Gerald makes sure whoever delivers the offer is clear that it comes with no strings attached to the past. She takes it or she doesn't. If she takes it, she's an employee, same as everyone else. If she performs, she advances. The history between us is not her professional ceiling. A pause. You know, Gerald said, most people who survive what you survived come out of it wanting to burn the world down. Most people who survive what I survived, Evelyn said, Don't have a grandfather who wrote them a letter telling them not to. She pushed open the front door. I'll be in the office at 2. Outside, the November air was exactly as cold as it had been a year ago. The same month, almost the same week. Evelyn stood on the stone steps of the Harrington estate and looked at the driveway where she had once stood in the rain with a broken suitcase and the specific hollowness of someone who has just lost everything they thought they had. She thought about that woman. She thought about her standing in the rain with $200 and a photograph of her dead parents and the raw animal shock of someone who has just been thrown away by people she had genuinely tried to love. She thought, I would go back for her, if I could. I would go back to that driveway and stand beside her in the rain and tell her not that it was going to be all right. Not the comfortable lie. I would tell her the truth. I would tell her this is the worst night and it is also the beginning. You are going to do things in the next year that you cannot imagine from where you're standing. You are going to learn that the person you thought you were shrinking to fit into someone else's life was actually the most capable person in every room. You just never had the space to find out. She thought, and she would not have believed me. And that was all right. She hadn't needed to believe it in advance. She had only needed to keep walking. 7 minutes through the rain to the road. One decision to get in the car. One day at a time in Zurich with Isabel's spreadsheets and Marcus's legal briefs and Cora's quiet insistence that she stand up straight and take up the space she was owed. 1 foot in front of the other. That was all courage ever actually was. She heard a car on the drive. Gerald arriving early. He got out and walked toward her, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. He looked at her standing on the steps of what was now legally and completely her property. The board approved the foundation budget this morning, he said as he reached her. Full endowment transferred. Legal team starts Monday. Good, she said. The Times wants an interview, he said. The reporter covering the Harrington story. She wants your account, the personal narrative. Your grandmother, your marriage, the full arc. He paused. It would be significant. First time you've spoken publicly. Evelyn had been thinking about this for weeks. About whether to speak. About whether her grandmother's story was best served by her silence, a kind of private dignity, or by her voice. She had decided. Schedule it, she said. But I have conditions. The interview focuses on my grandmother's story and the foundation's work. My marriage is context, not content. I'll talk about what happened, but I won't perform it. No victim narrative, no revenge story. She paused. The headline is Margaret Cole Sterling. Everything else is footnote. Gerald nodded. I'll call them this afternoon. She looked out over the grounds, the bare trees, the iron gates now repainted, now standing open. Next spring, they would stay open. The foundation's residents would come and go freely, would have keys, would know that this was a place of safety, not confinement. She thought about what she wanted to say in that interview. Not the drama of it, not the red dress, not the contract signing, not Ryan's face when he finally saw her. Those things had happened and they mattered, and she wouldn't pretend otherwise. But they were not the story. They were the events through which the story moved. The story was her grandmother signing her name in fear. The story was her mother running from a shadow she didn't have words for. The story was a little girl growing up in foster care with a photograph of her parents and no knowledge of what she came from or what she was worth. The story was a woman standing in the rain being told she was nothing, choosing to keep walking anyway. The story was what happened when you gave a silenced woman enough time, enough resources, and enough space to finally speak. That was the story. And it wasn't finished. It would not be finished with an interview or a foundation launch or the conversion of a stolen mansion into a place of shelter. It would not be finished in Evelyn's lifetime. The work of giving silenced people their voices back, the specific grinding case-by-case, year-by-year work of it, did not have an ending. It had only continuation. She was at peace with that. She looked at Gerald. He had been with her from the beginning, from the rain-soaked road outside the Harrington gates from the Rolls-Royce, and the photograph of her grandmother, and the number on the document that she had read twice, because the first time hadn't seemed real. Gerald, she said. Yes. Thank you. For looking for 3 years. For finding me. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the careful quality of a man who did not often let his guard down and was choosing deliberately to do so now. I need you to understand something, he said. I have spent 40 years in estate law. I have delivered inheritances to people who spent the rest of their lives being diminished by them. People who had everything handed to them and used it to become smaller versions of what they could have been. He paused. What you've done in the past year, what you've built, what you've chosen not to destroy, who you've decided to be, that is not the money, Evelyn. The money is the tool. You are the builder. He looked at her steadily. Edmund Sterling spent his whole career building something he hoped would outlast him. It took 50 years of theft, a forced silence, a broken marriage, and a rainy night in Connecticut. But I think he finally got what he was building toward. Evelyn looked at the open gates. She thought about a man she had never met who had written her a letter in 1986 and trusted that someone someday would be able to use it. She thought about a grandmother she barely remembered, who had carried a secret for decades and passed it down unknowingly in the shape of her own face. She thought about a mother who had run from something she couldn't name and raised a daughter who would one day name it for the world. She thought about a young woman at 24 who had signed a prenuptial agreement because she was in love and would have signed anything. She thought about a woman at 30 standing in the rain choosing to walk. All of them were part of her. All of them had brought her to this driveway, to this morning, to this open gate. She straightened her coat. "Let's go," she said. "We have work to do." She walked through this gate of the Harrington estate, her foundation, her grandmother's vindication, and she did not look back. Not because the past didn't matter, but because she had already done the one thing that the past required of her. She had refused to let it be the end of the story. Evelyn Sterling had been thrown into a storm by people who believed she was nothing. She had walked out of that storm as the woman who owned everything they had built on a lie, who had given their stolen house back to the people the world had tried to silence, who had taken 50 years of injustice and turned it into something that would protect women long after her own name was forgotten. Wealth does not create worth. Power does not create character. And the woman they threw into the rain did not simply survive. She became the storm.